On July 25, 1946, at a remote Pacific lagoon called Bikini Atoll, the United States military unleashed the power of the sun. An atomic bomb detonated 90 feet underwater, violently throwing 2 million tons of radioactive ocean into the sky. Moored just 400 yards from the epicenter of this apocalyptic blast was an American aircraft carrier. She didn't belong to the enemy. She was the USS Saratoga, one of the most legendary warships in American history. She had survived Japanese submarines. She had survived swarms of kamikazes. She had even survived a direct hit from a previous nuclear bomb just weeks earlier. Why was America trying so hard to vaporize its own warship? To understand the execution of the USS Saratoga, you have to understand her bizarre Frankenstein origins. This is the story of the carrier that shouldn't have existed, the ship that accidentally gave Japan the blueprint for Pearl Harbor, and the Unkillable Giant that anchored the Pacific War. In 1920, the USS Saratoga wasn't supposed to be an aircraft carrier. She was designated CC-3, a massive, heavily armored Lexington-class battlecruiser designed to slug it out with 16-inch guns. But then came the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. The world's superpowers agreed to stop building massive battleships to prevent a new arms race. The Saratoga was slated to be scrapped before she was even finished. But the U.S. Navy found a legal loophole. The treaty allowed nations to convert 2 unfinished hulls into a new, experimental type of ship, aircraft carriers. The engineers took this massive, heavy battlecruiser hull and welded a massive, flat flight deck on top. The result was a weird hybrid monster. She was incredibly fast, capable of 33 knots, but she still carried massive 8-inch artillery guns on her deck, just in case this whole airplane thing turned out to be a fad. To help pilots distinguish her from her identical sister ship, the Lexington, the Navy painted a massive black vertical stripe down her funnel. Landing on the wrong carrier in the 1930s was a fast track to getting mercilessly bullied by the crew and having your airplane covered in graffiti. But the Saratoga was about to do something far more serious than practice landings. She was about to expose the greatest fatal flaw in American defense. In 1932, the U.S. Navy staged Fleet Problem 13, a massive wargame exercise to test the defenses of Hawaii. The commander of the Saratoga's strike force, Admiral Harry Yarnell, decided to ignore the traditional rules of battleship warfare. He took the Saratoga, left his slow battleships behind, and vanished into a storm front north of Hawaii. On a quiet Sunday morning, just before dawn, Yarnell launched 152 aircraft from the Saratoga and her sister ship. They swept out of the clouds and destroyed the American aircraft on the ground at Ford Island, and sank the battleships moored at Battleship Row. The umpires of the war game ruled it a total, catastrophic defeat for the defenders of Pearl Harbor. How did the U.S. High Command react to this glaring system error? They ignored it. The battleship admirals complained that Yarnell had cheated by attacking on a Sunday morning and using bad weather to hide. They dismissed the carrier strike as a stunt, but someone else was paying very close attention. Officers in the Imperial Japanese Navy read the public reports of the Saratoga's Sunday morning raid. 9 years later, on December 7, 1941, Japan would use the exact same playbook, attacking on a Sunday morning from the north. The Saratoga hadn't just tested Pearl Harbor, she had written the script for its destruction. When the real war broke out, the Saratoga was suddenly America's most vital asset, but she was plagued by terrible luck. Just weeks after Pearl Harbor, she was struck by a torpedo from the Japanese submarine I-6. The damage forced her into dry dock for months. Because of this single torpedo, the Saratoga missed the Battle of the Coral Sea. More importantly, she missed the Battle of Midway, forcing the U.S. Navy to fight the most decisive engagement of the war short-handed. When she finally returned to the Solomons campaign, her aircraft sank the Japanese carrier Ryujo. But immediately after, she was hit by another submarine torpedo. However, this curse suddenly became America's salvation. By late 1942, the U.S. carrier fleet was decimated. The Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet were at the bottom of the ocean. The Enterprise was badly damaged. For a terrifying brief period in the Pacific War, the USS Saratoga was the only operational full-deck fleet carrier the United States possessed. She was the lone wolf, holding the line against the entire Imperial Japanese Navy, operating alongside the borrowed British carrier HMS Victorious just to keep the Allied presence alive. As America's industrial might kicked in, dozens of new Essex-class carriers arrived, and the Saratoga transitioned to a night strike and support role. But her ultimate test of survival came at Iwo Jima in early 1945. Due to a tactical oversight, she was left with an escort of only 3 small destroyers. The Japanese capitalized instantly. A swarm of kamikazes descended from the clouds. In the span of just 3 minutes, the Saratoga was hit by 5 kamikaze planes and 3 bombs. Her forward flight deck was shredded. Raging fuel fires consumed her hangar. By all the laws of naval architecture, a ship with a wooden flight deck hit this many times should have capsized and sunk. But the Frankenstein battlecruiser hull refused to die. Her crew fought the fires back from the brink of the magazines, saving the ship and limping her back to port. She was repaired and survived to see the Japanese surrender. By 1946, the Saratoga was a hero, but she was obsolete. The Navy had too many new ships, and the world was entering the atomic age. The military needed to know what a nuclear weapon would do to a fleet. They selected the Saratoga as a primary target for Operation Crossroads. On July 1st, they dropped Test Able, an atomic bomb detonated in the air right above the fleet. The blast vaporized smaller ships, but the Saratoga, tough as iron, merely caught fire. The fire was extinguished. She survived a nuclear bomb. So 3 weeks later, they rigged Test Baker. They suspended a nuclear device under a landing craft just 400 yards away from her hull and detonated it underwater. The physics of an underwater nuclear blast are horrifying. It creates a hydraulic shockwave that strikes with the force of a solid wall of steel. The blast lifted the 36,000-ton Saratoga entirely out of the water, snapping her mast and crushing her massive hull inward. She took 8 hours to die, slowly taking on water before finally slipping beneath the radioactive waves. Today, because the lagoon at Bikini Atoll is relatively shallow, the USS Saratoga sits upright in the sand, her flight deck just 40 feet below the surface. She is one of the only diveable aircraft carriers in the world. She is the ultimate outlier of the 20th century. She was born from a legal loophole. She proved her own country's vulnerability in a war game they ignored. She survived torpedoes and suicide planes when she was the only ship left to defend the Pacific. And in the end, she didn't fall to the enemy. It took the most destructive force ever created by human hands to finally send her to rest. If the bizarre, indestructible history of the USS Saratoga changed how you see World War II naval warfare, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that real, unpolished history deserves to be remembered. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the archives. What do you think if the US Navy had listened to the Saratoga's successful attack on Pearl Harbor in 1932? Could they have prevented the tragedy of 1941? Let us know in the comments below.